They left me on the side of the highway. In the middle of nowhere, under that cruel desert sun, I watched the dust from their truck disappear with everything I owned. No wallet, no phone, just my duffel bag and the sound of my own breathing. My son will come back, I told myself. But deep down, I knew he wouldn't. His wife laughed from the passenger seat as they drove away. "You signed the papers, old man. The house is ours." They left me with $27 in cash and a bottle of water warm as soup. For 40 years, I built that ranch with my bare hands. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 bullet in the leg, and 1 promise to my late wife. "They'll never take what we built, Mary." But they did. Or at least they thought they did. What they didn't know was simple. The paper I signed wasn't what they thought. Because when you try to rob a soldier who's buried friends for less than that, you'd better pray he doesn't stay quiet for too long. That silence? That was me reloading. And before I tell you what happened next, help me reach 1,000 subscribers by hitting that subscribe button. It's completely free for you, but it means so much to me. Thank you, truly, for your support. The road shimmered like a sheet of glass beneath the noon heat. I walked until my knees locked, and the sky started to tilt. When the pickup slowed beside me, I thought it was them coming back. But it wasn't. It was a stranger, a man about my age, wearing an oil-stained ball cap and a look that said he'd seen this kind of mess before. "You all right, buddy?" he asked. I tried to speak, but my throat was dust. He handed me a cold bottle of water from his cooler, the kind that sweats in your hand. I drank half of it in one go. He drove me 20 miles into town, to a small diner near the gas station. I sat there for an hour, staring at the reflection of my face in the chrome napkin holder. Sunburned, cracked, unrecognizable. The waitress poured me coffee without asking. She didn't say a word, but she saw everything in my eyes. That's when the quiet came. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort you, but judges you. The kind that asks, "How did you let it get this far?" Because truth is, this didn't start on that highway. It started a year ago, maybe longer. The day my son, Ryan, and his wife, Claire, moved into my ranch, just for a while. They said they'd help me around the property after my knee surgery. Ryan was good with tools. Claire knew how to handle paperwork. It sounded fair at the time. We even laughed about it. 3 generations under one roof, I said. She smiled and replied, "We'll make it work, Dad. But small cracks don't show until the light hits them." At first it was little things. Ryan changed how bills were paid, claimed he'd automate everything online. "Dad, you shouldn't stress over that stuff anymore." Claire started answering my phone when the bank called. "They just want to confirm transfers," she'd say with that soft teacher voice of hers. Then came the subtle comments, the ones that sound like kindness until you replay them later. "You forget where you put the keys again? Maybe you should stop driving for a while. You get tired easier these days." "You need to rest, Dad. Let us handle things." I didn't argue. I was raised in a world where silence meant respect, but silence can also be surrender. The ranch started to feel smaller. My chair at the table moved closer to the corner, like I was visiting my own house. My coffee mug disappeared. They bought new ones, matching set, no chips. The mug Mary gave me years ago, the one that said "Still Standing," ended up in a donation box. One evening I found my mail already opened. The envelope from the VA was torn, folded wrong. "Oh, I just thought it was junk," Claire said. The letter inside was about my pension adjustment, the kind that made numbers change. That night, I lay in bed listening to them talk in the next room. My son's voice was low, but the wall between us was old and thin. "He's sitting on all that land and doesn't even use half of it," Ryan whispered. Claire replied, "If we refinance, we could get enough to expand, maybe build that guest house." "Guest house," he repeated, like it was a promise. I should have walked in right then. Instead, I turned to the wall and pretended I didn't hear. The next morning, Ryan came to me all smiles, holding a folder. "Hey Dad, need your signature for the insurance renewal." He placed the pen in my hand like I was a child learning to write. I hesitated. "What's this about?" "Just a formality. Protects the property." I looked at the fine print, the kind printed small enough to hide sins. Before I could ask more, he said, "You trust me, right?" I did. That was my first mistake. Weeks went by. Ryan started calling the ranch our home. Claire redecorated Mary's kitchen, new curtains, new color, no trace of her. Even her wind chime was gone. "It was old," Claire said when I asked. "Old. Like me, I guess." I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe they were trying to modernize, to make the place theirs too. But the air shifted. Ryan stopped calling me Dad. He started saying the old man. Sometimes I'd walk in the room, and conversation would die mid-sentence, laughter turning into silence sharper than any insult. One afternoon, I overheard them arguing in the barn. "He's catching on," Claire hissed. Ryan's voice was tight. "Then we move faster. The deed's already drafted." My blood turned to ice. I stepped back before they could see me, heart pounding so loud I thought it would echo off the tin roof. That night I searched the office desk after they went to sleep. The papers weren't hard to find. A property transfer form with my name already written, but the signature line blank. The notary section, however, wasn't. Someone had stamped it already. My name, my house, their future. I sat there till dawn, staring at that paper. That's when I understood. The war wasn't over. It had just changed uniforms. The next morning, I smiled at them like nothing had happened. Made pancakes, poured coffee, but inside I was counting steps again, like back in training. You don't fight panic. You prepare positions. You wait. They thought my silence meant defeat. They didn't know silence was the sound of strategy. When people ask what betrayal feels like, I tell them it's not loud. It doesn't scream. It whispers good morning while hiding a knife. And on that morning, as the sun cut through the kitchen blinds, I decided something. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to outlast them. Because a soldier's calm isn't peace, it's patience. The next few weeks, I pretended everything was fine. Pretended not to notice the missing envelopes, the new locks on the file cabinet, the way Ryan had started answering my calls before I could pick up the phone myself. Pretended not to see the contempt in his eyes when I asked simple questions, or the way Claire filmed me on her phone when I forgot where I'd put my glasses. At first, she said it was to help track my memory, but I knew better. A lens pointed at you changes how people treat you. It turns you from a man into a case study. Every time that phone appeared, I felt smaller. They started correcting me in front of others, too. At the feed store, Ryan laughed when I misread a price tag. "Dad's eyesight's going, huh?" he said, loud enough for the cashier to hear. Claire joined in with her gentle smile. "We're keeping an eye on him." You know how age sneaks up. The cashier chuckled, the way people do when they want to stay polite. That laugh hit harder than any bullet I ever dodged. I went home that day and stood in the barn for an hour, surrounded by the smell of hay and oil, and wondered if this was how it felt to disappear. Not all at once, but inch by inch, under the weight of pity. Then the tests began. Ryan started leaving small traps. Papers on the counter labeled urgent, meant for me to sign. Receipts tucked into my mail. Medical forms already filled out with my name. Each one a line they wanted me to cross. To prove I was too trusting, too tired to notice. One evening, Claire brought me tea. She never did that before. Her voice was syrup sweet. "You've been under stress, Dad. Maybe you should see someone about memory stuff. Just to get ahead of it." I stared into the cup. "You think I'm losing it?" "Oh no," she said quickly. "But we worry. Sometimes you repeat things or forget what day it is." I almost smiled. "You mean when I repeat something, you call it confusion. But when Ryan repeats a lie, you call it leadership. Her face froze, just a second too long, then she changed the subject. That was the first crack. 2 days later, a social worker showed up at the ranch. She said she was responding to a family wellness check. I didn't have to ask who called her. She looked around, asked if I lived alone, if I managed my medications, if I ever felt unsafe. When I asked who filed the report, she just said, "Concerned relatives." After she left, I walked back to the porch and sat under the same wind chime Mary once loved. It didn't make a sound anymore. The wind was there, but the music was gone. That night, Ryan came home with beer on his breath. "You talked to the lady?" he asked casually. "I did. She's just doing her job." "Whose job exactly?" He shrugged. "She's trying to help you." "No," I said quietly. "She's helping you build a case." Ryan's jaw clenched. "You think I'd do that?" I didn't answer. The silence was enough. He stared at me for a long time, then said, "You're not as sharp as you think anymore, old man. Maybe it's time you faced that." He left before I could respond, and for the first time, I felt something colder than anger. I felt pity, because I realized he'd mistaken cruelty for strength. A week later, I found a folder labeled estate planning. Inside were printed emails between Ryan and a lawyer. The words conservatorship hearing burned through the page. I took the folder, placed it carefully in the locked drawer of my desk, and slid my old recorder inside. Then I pressed record. The next morning, when Ryan came in demanding I sign a routine authorization, I kept my voice calm. "What's this one for?" "Just insurance renewal, like last time." "Same lawyer?" I asked. He froze. "What do you mean?" "The one you've been emailing." His face drained. "You've been going through my stuff?" "No," I said. "You left it where I could find it." His voice rose. "You don't understand, Dad. We're trying to protect you. You could lose everything if something happens." "I already lost everything," I said quietly, "the moment you stopped calling me Dad." For a second, he looked almost human again. His mouth opened like he wanted to say sorry, but Claire appeared behind him, her phone in hand. "Stop filming me," I said. "It's for your safety," she answered. "No, Claire," I said, looking right into the lens. "It's for your story, the one where you get to be the victim." Her smile faltered. That night, I sat in my truck under the open sky. The desert wind hummed through the broken window seal. I played back the recording, every word, every lie, every manipulation. It sounded like a confession dressed as concern. I realized then, this wasn't about a house anymore. It was about control, about rewriting a man's story before he could defend it. And that was when something inside me hardened. I started keeping a journal, not the kind for thoughts, but for evidence. Every date, every comment, every expense they forgot to explain. I kept receipts, bank notices, call logs. I printed everything and sealed it in envelopes marked with dates, like field reports from a private war. But the cruelest part wasn't the deception. It was how well they played the part of loving caretakers. To the neighbors, they were saints. To me, they were smiling thieves. They took me to Sunday service just to parade their kindness. They told the pastor I was struggling. He laid a hand on my shoulder and prayed for my clarity. I smiled and said amen, because I knew what they didn't. Clarity was coming, just not the way they expected. Back home, Ryan handed me a cup of coffee. "You okay, Dad?" "Never better," I said. "You?" He nodded, but there was a flicker in his eyes. Something uneasy, like he could sense the shift, but couldn't name it yet. I wasn't broken anymore. I was collecting ammunition, paper, proof, patience. They thought I was fading, but I was recording their downfall one breath at a time. And the cruelest part? They still thought they were winning. They still thought they were winning. So I let them. Morning after morning, I kept the rhythm they expected. Coffee at 6, fence line by 7, slow walk past the pecan trees where the irrigation squeaked like an old harmonica. I let Ryan take the truck keys, just in case, and nodded when Claire said she'd help with the mail. I even pretended to nap in the recliner after lunch, so they could whisper in the kitchen with their backs turned, believing I'd grown too soft to hear through walls I helped raise. Silence was my camouflage. Paper would be my rifle. 2 days after that folder, labeled estate planning, burned a groove in my skull, I took the side road into town on foot before sunrise. The highway roar hadn't started yet. Coyotes still owned the sound. I cut behind the shuttered feed store to a narrow brick building with a bronze plaque that caught the first light. Morales and Comer Law, Water, Land, and Estates. Hal Morales served in the Guard back when I was still mending pulled calves with duct tape and a prayer. He'd spoken at a veterans' breakfast once about deeds and fraud like they were fence knots. Simple if you learned the twist. The door wasn't open, but his light was on. I tapped the glass and held up my cap. He waved me in with 2 fingers, same as he would on the range. No handshakes. We just nodded and sat. I put the manila envelopes down one by one, dates facing up, bank notices, photos of opened mail, a printout of an email thread I wasn't supposed to read, the recorder. I didn't talk. I let the paper speak first. Hal skimmed without interrupting, marking corners with thumbnail dents. He didn't ask how I'd gotten the emails, or why my penmanship on the dates was too steady for a man they called forgetful. He just breathed through his nose like a bull that knows the gate is about to go up. When he did speak, it wasn't sympathy. It was procedure. First, he said, we anchor your competence, not in opinions, in records. You'll schedule a full cognitive eval with somebody the court respects, not some online checklist, licensed specialist in town. Today, if possible. I nodded. Second, we revoke any document you signed under assistance and record a new chain of authority that doesn't include your son or his wife. Power of attorney, health directives, the whole bundle. We notarize properly, 2 witnesses outside family, and we file copies where they can't be misplaced. He slid a blank set across. The paper was thick enough to feel like it meant something. Third, he went on, tapping the recorder, we build a clean evidentiary trail, not just what they said, but when and how. Dates, times, who else was present, any public outings where they performed their concern. People remember shows, juries too. I told him about the Sunday service and the pastor's hand on my shoulder, about the way Claire's camera watched me pour milk like it was a felony. He wrote names as if he were filling a brand book. Pastor Ellis, cashier at the feed store. The neighbor with the windmill dog that barks at anything but snakes. Witnesses are built from ordinary minutes. Fourth, Hal said, voice lowering. We set a trap that isn't illegal but is instructive. Offer them something they can't refuse. An appointment to sign anything they need. But we control the room. Neutral ground, clear video, a legitimate notary. If they bring a pre-stamped deed, we have them on record pushing a fraudulent instrument. If they balk, we have pattern. I let the plan settle. It didn't roar. It clicked, like the quiet of a safety sliding off. Before I left, I pulled one thing from my pocket I hadn't touched in years, a small brass key Mary used to hang on a ribbon inside her closet. We called it the anniversary key because it didn't open any door. It opened a box she gave me on our 25th. Oak, hand-sanded, lined with felt. It held letters I wrote to her from places where sand got into everything, even prayer. I placed the key on Hal's desk. This isn't evidence, I said. It's a promise. Don't let me swing at ghosts. He closed my fingers around it and nodded. We're not hunting ghosts. We're building light. By mid-morning, I had an appointment for Friday with a cognitive specialist in the medical building next to the pharmacy that still sells licorice like it's a secret. I called from a payphone outside. It still took quarters, like time hadn't bullied it yet. I didn't leave messages at home anymore. Messages became stories in the wrong mouths. Back at the ranch, I played the part. Ryan asked where I'd been. I said walking. Claire asked if I'd remembered to take my pills. I smiled and held up the organizer without telling her I'd switched the labels on 2 compartments as a line test. She didn't notice. They rarely notice the man they've already decided you are. That evening I laid out the 3 tokens I'd chosen without saying the word. Mary would have laughed at me naming them like charms, but it helped me think. The memory token was simple. Her wind chime. The one Claire called old. I found it in the shed beneath a tarp that smelled like mice and rain. I rehung it outside the bedroom window before dawn. When the breeze came at 10, it made the same low bells I'd heard the night I asked her to marry me. Memory is a weapon when it reminds you who you were before fear. The evidence token was the recorder, but I added a flash drive Hal had given me. Encrypted, he said, as if villains understood locks. Each night I copied the day's files like I was packing rations. I sealed extra copies in an envelope and handed it to the neighbor who never asked questions. Told her to open if anything ever felt wrong. She nodded like a woman who'd kept bigger secrets for better causes. The justice token I didn't have yet. Hal said justice needed a stage. Not the courtroom, not at first. Courts move like cattle in summer, and I didn't want my life to be chewed by flies that long. We needed something public but ordinary, where decent folks gather and remember who they think they are. The ranchers' co-op annual meeting was in 3 weeks at the fairgrounds, right after the auction. I was on the board back when my knees still liked stairs. They'd let me speak if I asked. They'd listen if I wore the right shirt and didn't waste their time. I told Hal the idea. He didn't smile, but his eyes warmed. A co-op meeting is a church without hymns, he said. People believe what they clap for. Friday's evaluation felt like a pop quiz you can't study for, even if you've been studying your whole life. The doctor wore shoes with soft soles. They make people trust you, those shoes. He asked about dates and presidents and what 3 words I'd remember after 10 minutes. I picked gate, river, saddle because those are the only 3 metaphors a ranch has when it comes to loss. What keeps out, what runs through, what carries weight. We talked about the war in the respectful way strangers do when they can't decide whether to apologize for the question. He had me draw a clock, thread numbers where a day should go, then walk a straight line that a drunk could fail but a careful man could ace. I passed more than I failed, which is all any man asks from himself at my age. He said he'd file the report Monday. On the way out, I bought a cheap flip phone and paid cash. It wasn't much, but it would ring in my pocket without going through anyone's hands first. I saved 1 number, Hal's office. Another, the co-op manager, whose laugh sounds like chain in a bucket. I asked if there was a slot at the meeting for an old-timer to talk about land bonds and neighbor ethics. He said, "If you keep it under 5, sure." I promised to keep it under 5 and knew I wouldn't. At home, the air wore a new temperature. Claire was extra pleasant. Ryan was extra helpful. They cooked dinner early and set my plate with the good fork I thought was lost. She asked about my day and blinked too slowly at my answers like she was recording with her eyes. He said he'd made a friendly inquiry at the bank to streamline statements. That word friendly always worries me when it describes money. After dishes, I stood in the doorway and listened. They thought I went to bed early on Fridays. They were wrong. The conversation was half whisper, half hiss. "He's still stubborn," Claire said. "He'll come around," Ryan replied. "He always does." "And if he doesn't?" "Then we schedule the signing we talked about. Tell him it's estate planning. And we bring the notary we used last time." "Last time wasn't real," she said, voice dropping. "We can't risk a stamp again without control." "You let me worry about control," he answered. Control. It's a small word that thinks it's a big one. The next morning I told them I'd been thinking, and maybe they were right about getting my affairs neat. I said it tired, like a man who wanted to stop sorting screws by size. Ryan perked up. Claire's mouth made a surprised "oh, too perfect to be accidental." I suggested we do it properly at the notary in town, not at the kitchen table. I'd even wear a clean shirt, I said, because appearances matter. They agreed too fast, which is how you know a trap still looks like lunch to a hungry thief. Hal booked the notary he trusts, a woman who's notarized more cattle sale bills than wedding licenses, which means she respects paper the way a rancher respects rain. He arranged for neutral witnesses and a clerk who could make clean copies on the spot. He also put a tiny camera on the bookshelf aimed at the signing table. Not to catch them doing something illegal, yet. Just to catch the choreography. On the drive into town, Ryan kept up a steady patter about legacy and responsibility, and that word, protect. Claire said she'd brought cookies for the notary because hospitality smooths paperwork. I stared out the window and counted mile markers. At 22, I learned that counting steals panics oxygen. At 70, I relearned it with a calmer heart. Inside the notary's office, the air smelled like paper and lemon oil. The woman behind the counter greeted us like we were there to register a trailer, not betray a father. Hal arrived 2 minutes later with a briefcase and a joke about parking that made nobody laugh. We sat. He placed my documents on the table first. Revocations, replacements, grants of authority to a neutral fiduciary service in town. Not to a relative, not to anyone with a key to my pantry. He walked me through each clause the way you teach a new hand to tie a bowline. Slow, sure, no hidden ends. Then Ryan cleared his throat and produced a folder. He slid it toward me with 2 fingers like catfish on a stringer. The paper inside wore a notary seal already pressed. Wrong angle, wrong ink, wrong everything if you know what right looks like. The notary's eyebrows rose a hair. She didn't speak. Hal didn't either. He just looked at Ryan's hand, then at the camera that wasn't supposed to be there, then at me. I didn't touch the folder. I pushed it back an inch and asked one question in the voice I used when a colt was about to kick itself bloody. What do you need me to sign that benefits me, not you? Silence filled the room like water in a trough. Ryan smiled, a tight, top-lip smile that used to belong to a boy who wanted a bicycle at Christmas. All of this benefits you, Dad. Then you won't mind if we read it line by line, I said. With witnesses who aren't married to the outcome. Hal's pen clicked once. The notary angled the page beneath the lamp. Claire shifted in her chair and fussed with a cookie tin that didn't need fussing. The camera's red dot kept its tiny promise. 5 minutes later, the notary excused herself to verify a seal. She took Ryan's paper in the back and returned with a copy of the statute tacked to a clipboard. She set it between us without ceremony. I watched Ryan read the words that said what he already knew. You can't stamp a signature that hasn't happened, and you can't make a legal instrument out of wishful thinking and bold ink. He laughed. Not a joyful laugh. The kind you use when a poker hand goes wrong and you want to look like you meant it. Must have grabbed the wrong draft, he said. We'll come back another day. We'll finish today, I answered, and signed my documents in a hand steady enough to shame the lies they'd rehearsed. When we walked out, the sun scratched the edges of the day like it wanted to start something new. Hal folded the signed copies into a fireproof sleeve and slid them into his briefcase. You have your anchor, he said. Next, we make sure the river knows which way it runs. What about the stage? I asked. He nodded toward the fairgrounds in the distance, where crews were raising aluminum bleachers and hanging banners that say the same thing every year about cooperation and harvest and pride. 3 weeks, he said. You speak for 5 minutes, maybe 8. Wear your work shirt. Bring your tokens. I'll bring the law. That night, the wind came up. The old chime sang for the first time in months, thin and bright. I stood by the window and listened to it cut the dark into manageable pieces. In the kitchen, I heard Claire telling Ryan that everything was fine, that nobody would believe an old man over a loving son. He told her to sleep. I could hear the way he said it, like a man who'd realized he'd have to change tactics, but hadn't learned the language yet. I turned off the lamp and let the room hold me. Silence didn't feel like surrender anymore. It felt like a countdown. And when that co-op meeting came, I wasn't going to raise my voice. I was going to raise the light. 3 weeks pass fast when you're counting lies. Every day looked the same from the outside. The hum of sprinklers, the metallic jangle of tools, Claire's cheerful voice rehearsing decency for the neighbors. But underneath that thin film of routine, the pressure built like a summer thunderhead. The notary scene had cracked something Ryan couldn't glue back. He smiled too much now, talked too loud. Claire cleaned things that were already clean. I could smell guilt in the house like mildew under paint. I didn't push. I just waited. Waiting is an old soldier's language. One evening after sunset, I saw the light in the office flick on. Ryan was in there alone, typing fast. The door wasn't closed all the way, so I stood outside long enough to catch a few words. Transfer, lien, liquidation. Then he muttered something that ended with, "before he finds out." I backed away and went out to the porch. The night air was heavy with sage and dust. Somewhere in the dark, the old wind chime moved, slow, deliberate, like it knew what was coming. The next morning, he was sugar-sweet again, made pancakes, called me Dad for the first time in months. "You look tired," he said. "I slept fine," I told him. "Good. You'll need your rest. Big week ahead." I smiled back, slow. "Bigger than you think." That Tuesday, I called the VA from town and asked for a verification of my pension statements. They said a man claiming to be my financial manager had tried to access them online. I asked for the name. They said Ryan Brooks Anderson. I thanked them politely and hung up. When I stepped outside, the wind had turned hot and dry, storm weather in disguise. I looked across the street and saw Claire's SUV parked by the pharmacy. She was inside, holding her phone low, whispering into it. Her reflection in the glass smiled while her mouth didn't move. I knew then she wasn't just supporting Ryan's greed, she was steering it. The kind of person who hides her cruelty behind organized drawers and perfect lipstick. That night, she asked what time the co-op meeting was. "Friday, after lunch," I said. "You sure you want to go?" "Why wouldn't I?" "Crowds tire you out," she said, stirring her tea. "I'll manage." She shrugged. "Okay, just don't embarrass yourself. Or us." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, but the reflection of the porch light did. It made her pupils flash like a camera flash in a courtroom. 2 days before the meeting, I got the official report from the specialist. Signed, sealed, dated, cognitively intact. No evidence of impairment. Hal had a copy notarized and filed the original with the clerk's office before sunset. It was my shield, invisible but solid. That evening, I left the folder half open on my desk, like bait. Claire saw it first. She paused in the hallway, then came closer. "What's this?" she asked. "Just paperwork," I said. "Stuff for the co-op." She flipped the top page and froze at the words, "Cognitive evaluation, pass." Her face rearranged itself, all the way from polite to pale. "Why would you?" she started. "Because you and Ryan keep saying I'm confused," I said softly. "Now we'll see who's confused." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She turned and left without a word. I could hear them arguing that night through the vents. "You told me the doctor was on our side," Ryan hissed. "He was supposed to be." "Well, he's not now," Claire's voice cracked. "Then make sure Friday goes right. Do you hear me? No mistakes this time." Mistakes were the only language they spoke fluently. Friday came clean and bright, a sky scrubbed by wind. The fairgrounds smelled of hay and diesel. Trucks lined the dirt lot like a parade of stubborn pride. I wore my work shirt, the one with the faded patch from the 1st Cavalry. It didn't need medals. The fabric already carried enough ghosts. Hal met me near the livestock pens. He handed me a small folder. Inside was the letter from the VA confirming my pension security and the doctor's report. Each notarized, each dated within the week. Evidence had never felt so quiet. "You ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." "They'll be here?" "They wouldn't miss it," I said. "Greed doesn't skip a show." When I walked into the hall, the chatter dipped. Familiar faces nodded. Neighbors, ranchers, the co-op board, people who'd seen my family smiling on Sundays. Ryan and Claire sat near the front, side by side, polished like campaign posters. She waved, as if the past 3 months had been a misunderstanding. Hal whispered, "You speak after the treasurer's report. Keep it plain." "Plain's all I speak," I told him. The meeting dragged through numbers and motions. I barely heard them. I watched Ryan check his watch, Claire adjust her necklace. She thought we were still playing her game. When the chairman finally said, "Any old business?" I raised my hand. He smiled, surprised. "Mr. Anderson, go ahead." I stood, slow enough for silence to settle. "Appreciate it," I said. "Just wanted to clear something up before I leave this community worse off than I found it." A few chuckles. They thought it was a joke. "I've been called forgetful lately," I continued. "Some folks said I was slipping, that I couldn't manage my affairs. I wanted to set the record straight before stories get taller than the truth." I opened the folder and read the first line of the doctor's report. My voice didn't shake. Then I held it up so the front row could see the seal. "Cognitively intact, no evidence of impairment." The room quieted, a paper shuffling sound, then nothing. Ryan's jaw tightened. Claire's hands vanished into her lap. "But since we're talking about management," I said, "I'd like to thank whoever called the VA pretending to be me. They must care a lot to handle my finances without permission. That's dedication." A ripple of confusion ran through the room. Someone whispered my son's name. Ryan stood halfway. "Dad, this isn't the place." "This is exactly the place," I said, louder now but still calm. "See, communities survive on trust, same as families. And when someone forges that trust, the paper might burn, but the truth doesn't." I reached into my shirt pocket and clicked the recorder. His own voice filled the hall, tinny but clear. "He'll come around. He always does. Then we schedule the signing. Tell him it's estate planning. Bring the notary we used last time." Every head turned toward him. Claire's face went white as salt. Hal stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "For the record," he said, "that conversation took place 4 days after Mr. Anderson's cognitive clearance, and here's the affidavit confirming the date." The chairman's gavel dropped, but nobody heard it. The sound was swallowed by the weight of realization. Ryan tried to speak. "You can't use—" "I already did," I said quietly. I pressed the second file, Claire's voice this time, sharper. "If he doesn't sign, we make sure he can't." Gasps. The room wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs. An audience to a morality play they didn't know they'd bought tickets for. The chairman stood. "Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, I think it's best you step outside." They left in a blur of murmurs and turned faces. No one followed them. When the doors closed, I clicked off the recorder. The silence that followed was clean, like air after lightning. Hal spoke softly into my ear. "That's enough. Let the truth walk on its own legs now." He was right. Justice doesn't shout. It signs. As I left the hall, people parted like tall grass. A few clapped my shoulder. Others avoided my eyes, ashamed of how easily they'd believed the lie. Outside, the sun had shifted low, gold and tired. Ryan's truck was gone. Claire's SUV too. Dust hung in the air behind them, drifting east, the same direction they'd driven the day they left me on that highway. I watched it until it disappeared, then turned to Hal. "Think they'll stop?" He shook his head. "Not until the sheriff does." He nodded toward the parking lot where 2 deputies waited by their cruiser, papers in hand. The warrants had moved faster than pride. I didn't watch the arrests. Some things don't deserve witnesses. I walked back toward the livestock pens. The animals didn't care who owned what, only who showed up to feed them. I reached the fence and leaned there for a long time, breathing dust that finally felt honest. That night, the ranch was quiet again. No staged conversations, no hidden cameras. Just the wind chime, Mary's chime, talking to the dark in a language I almost remembered. In the kitchen, I poured coffee instead of whiskey. I looked at the reflection in the window and saw a man older than before, but not broken. I'd kept my promise. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't raised a hand, only the truth. And now, for the first time in years, the silence in that house was mine. The morning after the co-op meeting, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, neighbors, even the pastor called to say he was praying for me. The story had leaked before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. Someone had filmed the whole thing, the moment I played that recording, and it was already circling through town like a brush fire. By noon, every local feed carried the same headline: Veteran outs family fraud at co-op meeting. There was a still image of me standing in front of the microphone, calm, my son frozen beside me like he'd seen a ghost. I hadn't planned to humiliate him. I'd planned to survive him, but humiliation was what he'd earned. Hal stopped by around midday with an envelope full of paperwork and a grin he didn't bother to hide. DA's office already opened an inquiry, he said. Sheriff served the warrants this morning. They'll be out on bail by tonight, but it won't matter. Paperwork's airtight. Good, I said. You all right? I'm better than I've been in years. He poured himself coffee, black as fence tar, and looked out at the open pasture. You'll need a statement. Reporters are circling. I shook my head. I already said what I needed to say. The rest belongs to the paper trail. The rest of the day, the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy. It was clean, like rain after dust. By evening, the first apology arrived. Typed, not signed. A message from Ryan's lawyer. My clients regret any misunderstanding and seek an amicable resolution. I deleted it. You can't file regret at the clerk's office. Then came the second wave. People who doubted me. Neighbors who had smiled through their teeth, thinking they were being kind while believing I'd lost my mind. They came by with casseroles and questions, not because they cared about truth, but because they wanted to be near it. I answered every knock the same way, with a nod and a thank you. No anger, no stories, just calm. The kind of calm that scares people more than fury. 2 days later, I drove into town. The sheriff's cruiser was parked outside the courthouse. Ryan and Claire were inside, posting bail. I didn't go in. I just sat across the street, watching them walk out with eyes full of daylight and shame. Ryan saw me. For a second he froze, then dropped his gaze like a man looking away from his own reflection. I didn't move, didn't wave, didn't gloat. Sometimes the only revenge worth keeping is your composure. The following week, the bank called. They'd audited every account Ryan touched. $47,000 in unauthorized transfers. They froze his remaining assets and reopened mine. The manager, a young woman who'd once told me I should let my son help with finances, could barely look me in the eye when she handed over the documents. We're deeply sorry, Mr. Anderson. It's all right, I said. Mistakes happen when people stop checking. That night, Hal brought over one last form to sign. It granted the court full authority to demand restitution from both of them. I signed it, then folded it into the same fireproof box that once held my medals. He looked at me a long time. You know, most men your age would have burned that house down before waiting this long. I smiled. That's the difference between war and peace, Hal. In war, you win by striking first. In peace, you win by standing last. When he left, the stars were so bright it felt like the desert itself was breathing again. A week later, the reporter from the local paper came by the ranch. She asked for a quote. Why tell the truth publicly, she said. Why not handle it quietly? Because lies breed in the dark, I told her, and light doesn't apologize for showing up. The story went national by accident. A veteran protecting his home, betrayed by family, exposing fraud with nothing but patience and a voice recorder. I never asked for it. But once truth leaves your hands, it travels where it needs to go. Strangers started sending letters, handwritten ones, the kind that smell like coffee and courage. Some told me about brothers who stole inheritances, daughters who drained accounts, sons who called them crazy. Every one of them ended the same. Thank you for proving we're not powerless. I read them all, then put them in a shoebox next to Mary's wind chime key. Proof that silence, used right, can echo farther than shouting ever could. Ryan and Claire didn't stay in town long. Rumor said they moved 3 counties over, changed jobs, maybe names. Didn't matter. They'd carry that story wherever they went. In small towns, reputation is permanent ink. I stayed, fed the horses, fixed the fence, paid the bills myself. Every now and then, I'd see a car slow down at the end of the drive, someone pointing from the passenger seat. The crazy old vet who turned out not so crazy after all. When the first check for restitution arrived, I didn't cash it right away. I left it pinned under a magnet on the fridge for a month, staring at the numbers until they stopped meaning money. It wasn't about dollars anymore. It was about balance, about making sure the world remembered that honesty still had teeth. I finally deposited it, then called Hal. I want to start something, I said. A fund for veterans who get trapped in these family scams. They can't all fight back alone. He nodded. What'll you call it? Mary named everything important, I said. This time I'll call it after her. The Mary Anderson Trust. Within weeks, donations came in. Small checks, big checks, one envelope full of cash from a man who only wrote, Semper Fi. One afternoon, a young reporter asked if I ever forgave my son. I told her forgiveness isn't a door you walk through. It's a hill you stop climbing when you're tired. You rest there, not because you forget, but because the view is enough. She smiled. That's a quote. No, I said. That's a warning. The justice was done, the paperwork complete, but peace doesn't come stamped or signed. It comes slowly, like dawn creeping through blinds. I still wake early, out of habit. Some mornings, I half expect to hear their voices again, the whispering, the plotting. Then I remember they're gone. I walk to the porch and listen to the chimes sing low over the desert wind. Sometimes it sounds like laughter, sometimes like prayer, always like freedom. They thought they took my house. What they really took was their own reflection, and I got back something better than property or pride. I got my silence back, the kind that doesn't hurt anymore, the kind that feels earned. Justice doesn't shout. It stands there unshaken and waits for the wind to carry the rest. The courthouse smelled like dust and old paper, the kind of air that carries every argument it's ever heard. I'd been there before, decades ago, when I swore an oath under a flag. This time, I wasn't wearing a uniform, just the same work shirt, ironed clean, sleeves rolled once. The benches were full. Reporters, neighbors, veterans from the post, even strangers who'd driven in just to watch. Everyone loves justice when it's someone else's battle. Hal sat beside me, quiet as always. Across the aisle, Ryan and Claire looked smaller than I remembered. They'd dressed for pity. Gray suits, pale faces, but guilt doesn't iron out with clothes. The judge entered. She was the kind of woman who didn't need to raise her voice to own a room. She read through the case summary without emotion. Fraud, forgery, elder exploitation. Words that sounded too neat for what they'd done. Then it began. The prosecution called witnesses. The notary who'd seen the fake stamp, the co-op chairman, the VA representative who'd fielded that fraudulent call. One by one, they laid the truth down like planks on a bridge. Every word crossed the same river, betrayal. When they played the recordings in court, the room fell silent again. Same voices, same arrogance, now echoing off wood and marble instead of a ranch wall. Claire flinched when she heard herself say, "If he doesn't sign, we make sure he can't." Ryan wouldn't look at her. Hal leaned close. "You don't have to testify if you don't want to." "I want to," I said. "It's my house, my name." When they called me to the stand, I took the oath slow. The Bible's edges were worn. Maybe too many hands had sworn to tell the truth and then forgotten what that meant. I didn't forget. The prosecutor asked me to describe what happened. I told them everything. Not the angry version, the real one. How I trusted. How I ignored the small signs. How I thought love could fix greed. The room stayed still. No one coughed. No one moved. Then the defense tried. They said age clouds memory. They said I misunderstood the paperwork. They even said my recordings were out of context. I let them talk until their own words tangled like wire. When it was my turn again, I looked straight at the jury and said, I didn't serve 2 wars to lose my home to paperwork. That was all. By afternoon, the verdict came back faster than anyone expected. Guilty. Both counts. The judge didn't smile, didn't scold. She just read the sentence and closed the file. 2 years, suspended after restitution and community service. It wasn't long, but it was public. And that's what mattered. Outside, the sun hit the courthouse steps like fire on stone. Reporters shouted questions I didn't answer. Claire kept her head down. Ryan didn't. He stopped halfway to their car and turned. You ruined us, he said. His voice wasn't angry, just lost. I walked closer, just enough for him to hear. No, son, you ruined yourself. I just stopped covering for it. He blinked, maybe to hold back whatever was left of his pride. Then he got in the car, and they drove off for good. Hal joined me on the steps. It's over, he said. Not yet, I answered. Paper's done. Now comes the healing. We walked to the truck in silence. Halfway there, a young deputy ran after me. Mr. Anderson, he said. My granddad served with the 5th Infantry. He used to say justice was a slow horse, but it always made it to the gate. Guess he was right. I shook his hand. Make sure it keeps running. That night, I didn't turn on the lights when I got home. I just sat by the window and let the moon find its way through the dust on the glass. The ranch was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty. The walls no longer listened for lies. They breathed with me. I took out the old oak box, Mary's box, and laid inside the final 3 things that told the story better than any verdict. The deed to the ranch, the recorder, and the court order sealed in blue. Memory, evidence, justice. I closed the lid, turned the key, and felt the click travel through my hand, like the sound of something finally ending. The next morning, I called Hal. It's done, I said. He exhaled. What now? Now I rebuild. A week later, the local paper printed a photo from the trial. Me on the stand, eyes forward, the flag behind me. They didn't need to write much. The headline said everything. He didn't shout. He signed. People stopped me at the diner, at the gas station, at church. They said I gave them hope. I didn't give them anything. I just refused to give up. The following month, I used part of the restitution money to renovate the barn, fix the roof, patch the gate. I hired a couple of veterans to help. Young guys, all hands and silence. They worked steady, didn't ask questions. Sometimes I caught them watching me like they were trying to memorize what calm looks like. One evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge, I handed them their pay and said, when someone tries to take what's yours, don't rush. Let them think they've won. Then make the truth do the work. They nodded. They'd understand later. I watched them drive off, their truck kicking dust across the horizon. For the first time, I didn't see dust as what's left behind. I saw it as proof something had moved forward. When the wind picked up, the chime outside the bedroom window began to sing again. The same soft notes Mary loved. I stood there for a long time, eyes closed, hearing it echo through the quiet. Justice doesn't roar. It breathes. And that night, the ranch finally breathed with me. The weeks that followed didn't feel like triumph. They felt like recovery. Quiet, slow, necessary. The reporters stopped calling. The neighbors stopped whispering. The dust on the driveway settled. I started waking up before dawn again, not out of habit, but because I wanted to. The air before sunrise tastes different when you've earned your peace. I walked the property line each morning, the same path I'd once walked with Ryan when he was still small enough to ride on my shoulders. Every fence post stood where I left it. Every nail I'd driven decades ago still held. The land hadn't betrayed me, only people had. One morning, I found a letter in the mailbox. No return address. The handwriting was Ryan's. I almost threw it away. But I opened it. It said he was sorry. That prison work made him think. That he missed the sound of the wind through the pecans. He didn't ask for forgiveness, just said he understood now what ownership really meant. He ended with 3 words. I was wrong. I read it once, folded it carefully, and set it on the kitchen table. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. Some words you don't react to. You just let them sit, like rain on dry ground, deciding for themselves whether to soak in. That afternoon, I drove into town and met with Hal. He read the letter too and nodded. Gonna answer him? He asked. Not yet, I said. Maybe someday. Maybe not. He smiled faintly. That's an answer. We spent the rest of the day setting up the first meeting for the Mary Anderson Trust. 3 veterans came. One brought his daughter. Another carried a folder of foreclosure papers he didn't understand. I helped him go through each line. Hal explained what to sign, what not to. The man cried quietly when we finished. I put a hand on his shoulder and said, "You don't owe them shame, just signatures in the right places." After they left, Hal said, This is the real revenge, making sure nobody else gets taken." He was right. Revenge burns fast. Protection lasts longer. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea. The stars looked close enough to touch. I thought about boundaries, not the kind you draw with fences, but the kind you learn to keep inside yourself. The kind that say, "This is mine. You can't touch this." A truck passed on the road, headlights cutting across the porch for a second. For a heartbeat, I imagined it slowing, turning in, Ryan behind the wheel. Then it was gone. And for the first time, that thought didn't hurt. The next day, I drove out to the ridge where Mary and I used to sit when the storms rolled in. I brought her chime key and a new post I'd carved myself. I hung the chime again where it caught the wind best. When it rang, it didn't sound like morning anymore. It sounded like something alive. "Boundaries," I said out loud, like she could still hear me. "Not walls, just gates I get to lock myself." I stayed there until sunset, watching the sky turn from gold to the color of old metals. The light felt honest again. When I got home, I found a message on the answering machine, a woman from a veterans group in another state. She'd heard about the trust and wanted to partner. I wrote down her number and smiled. That was Mary's way of saying, "Keep going." Before bed, I read Ryan's letter one more time, then placed it in the oak box beside the other 3 tokens: the deed, the recorder, the court order. I added a 4th envelope with his apology. Not as evidence, not as closure, just as proof that even ruin can whisper redemption. I locked the box and put the key back on its hook by the window. The night breeze brushed through the screen, making the chime sing low and steady. For the first time in a long time, I didn't hear guilt in its sound. I heard forgiveness. Not the kind you give away, but the kind you grow into. Silence had been my weapon. Now it was my boundary, and for the first time, I didn't need to defend it. The summer heat faded slower that year, as if the season didn't want to leave. The air smelled of dry hay and diesel again, the same scent that carried me through everything. Most mornings, I sat on the porch with my coffee and let the world wake up without rushing it. The ranch was alive in its own rhythm now. Fences mended, horses fed, paperwork clean, the kind of calm that used to feel impossible. Every sound was familiar again. The creak of the windmill, the low hum of cicadas, the chime outside the window whispering Mary's name when the breeze shifted west. People in town still nodded when they saw me. Not out of pity anymore, but out of respect. The story had long burned through the gossip cycle, but a few still stopped by just to say it gave them courage. I didn't know if I deserved that. All I did was survive. One afternoon, I sat by the mailbox waiting for the delivery truck. A small envelope came, postmarked from out of state. Inside was a photo. 3 veterans standing outside a small office with a sign that read, Mary Anderson Trust, Community Legal Help for Seniors. Under it, a note in simple handwriting. You started this. I stared at that picture for a long time, smiling in the quiet. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was continuation. Proof that even broken things can build something steady. That night, I went back to the ridge one last time. The sun was melting behind the hills, painting the sky in colors I couldn't name. The wind chime swayed, gentle, content. I whispered, "We did good, Mary." Then I stood there until the stars came out, until the sky turned from orange to velvet black. On the drive home, I thought about Ryan's letter again. I hadn't answered it, and maybe I never would. Some chapters aren't meant to be rewritten. They're meant to be read once, learned from, and set down carefully. Back home, I poured the last of the coffee, sat by the window, and let the quiet settle. It wasn't the silence of war anymore. It was peace. Earned, honest, and whole. If there's anything I've learned, it's this. Sometimes strength doesn't mean fighting louder. It means standing still long enough for the truth to catch up. Some battles end not with victory, but with clarity. And sometimes that's more than enough. So if you've been through something like this, if someone tried to write your story for you, remember, you still hold the pen. And before I tell you what happens next, help me reach 1,000 subscribers by hitting that subscribe button. It's completely free for you, but it means so much to me. Tell me what you think. Did I do the right thing? Did I go too far, or not far enough? I'd like to hear what justice sounds like to you. Thank you for listening, and thank you truly for staying until the end.